This is the Economic Club of Florida, a distinguished platform for discussion of the major national issues of the day. On today's program, former U.S. Senator and now NASA Chief Bill Nelson on Florida's larger-than-ever role in the return to the moon and beyond.
We have a space program in Florida that has come to life. All abandoned launch pads from years ago are roaring to life.
Good day and welcome to the 550th in our series of distinguished speaker programs. I'm Harvey Bennett for the Economic Club of Florida. With the growing privatization of spaceflight, can Florida remain the space capital of America? We're going to get the answer today directly from Bill Nelson, Administrator of NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The Miami and Melbourne native, who flew in space as a congressman, will share the latest on America's planned return to the moon, a manned spaceflight to Mars, and his goals for the space agency. Now, here's Barney Bishop, President of the Economic Club of Florida and President and CEO of Barney Bishop Consulting, with our formal introduction.
My pleasure now to introduce the Honorable Bill Nelson. In introducing Administrator Bill Nelson, one might simply proclaim that he is a former three-term Florida United States Senator. Having represented the Sunshine State with distinction in Washington, he's also served 12 years in the nation's capital, representing Florida in the U.S. House of Representatives. Add to that his fierce advocacy on behalf of NASA science and research projects and space exploration throughout his career, it makes perfect sense that the President of the United States would nominate him as the Chief NASA Administrator and that the Senate would approve his nomination unanimously, which is unusual, in a bipartisan vote. That's a very impressive resume by itself. But let me remind you folks that Senator Nelson lived among us here in Tallahassee. He's also served the people of Florida as Bart indicated, State Treasurer, Insurance Commissioner, Fire Marshal on the Florida Cabinet, member of the House for 6 years. He's been recognized throughout his long public service for leadership and integrity on matters beyond space, including insurance, quality education, reforms, economic development, diversification, modernizing Medicare and affordable health care, upgrading the condition of our military personnel, and he's a veteran himself, fighting for Florida and to save our Everglades, and during his chairmanship of the Senate Committee on Aging, developing legislation to enhance the lives of our seniors. Additionally, we can't forget his enlightened leadership as chairman of the House Subcommittee on Space, referred to by President Kennedy as the last unconquered frontier of our universe. In 1985, Bill went through official NASA training with Senator Jake Garn of Utah. Early that following year, he was the first sitting member, and still today the only, of the U.S. House of Representatives to travel into space as a qualified astronaut on the Space Shuttle Columbia. In reviewing Bill's career, I can't imagine a better qualified, a more experienced, or a better prepared person to commandeer the National Aeronautics and Space Administration than him. What will impact be to Florida and to the nation and the changes in the agency? We're going to hear from him now. So thank you, Administrator Bill Nelson. Appreciate you being here, sir. Thank you so much. Well, this is a homecoming for Grace and me, our son, Bill Jr. We spent just wonderful years here in Tallahassee, first in the legislature, then the hardest job I've ever had in public office as insurance commissioner. And we grew to love this community, its people. There's so many of you in this audience today that extended those hands of friendship to us, and we are so grateful. And so it was a great honor that Bill Gunner reached out to me and asked me to come and join you today. I wanted to do this for Bill
because I have so much respect for him. Bart has already told you about the parallels in our lives. And Bill was about 10 years ahead of me, and he was more of a mentor. But as Bart said, as he choked up, the man of integrity in public office is what I most valued. That was just a great role model for me and for our family. And so over the years, it has been a privilege for us to have been interwoven into the lives of the Gunner family. I want to point out that over the years, whatever success someone has, Ash, you know this well, in public office, it's because of the people that you surround yourself with. And one of the great ones that came right out of Tallahassee is Pete Mitchell. Everybody, I see lots of nods. People knew I was serious when I was elected as insurance commissioner because I asked Pete to be our chief of staff. And so too, I carry through on that tradition, and Pete was with us last night. He'll be with us later today. We're going from here over to the Challenger Center, and we have students from the middle schools as well as from FAMU and FSU that are coming this afternoon, and I'm going to tell them about space. And we're also joined by Shara Anderson Lambert, who was with me for 18 years in the Senate. She was to be named the head of the U.S. Department of Agriculture for the state of Florida, and she said no. She wanted to come back and be with the Nelson team, and so Shara is here as a part of our team in the NASA headquarters. When Stan Tate, and this was back when I was actually in the legislature, he went to our speaker, Don Tucker, and then to the Senate President, Mallory Horn, and worked it out with the Florida Chamber of Commerce and presented the proposal for a Florida Economic Club. And it was going to be what you all are today. And that tradition continues. To many Floridians and Americans, look at the political discourse today. Look at the discourse here. The civility, the camaraderie, the bipartisanship. By the way, I might say that that's the same at NASA. It's one of those bipartisan, even nonpartisan islands in a sea of rigid, ugly, highly contentious partisan politics. And because of that, people gravitate to NASA. It's not only the gee-whiz stuff that we're doing. Look how people were just so excited when they saw 7 minutes of terror as that rover went through the Martian atmosphere and landed. And then 2 days later, the little helicopter, Ingenuity, flies for the first time on a other celestial body. It's all those gee-whiz things, but NASA is something that can unify the country as well as clubs like this. That experience was honed for me 36 years ago, when I had the privilege of being asked by the administrator of NASA when I was the chairman of the Space Subcommittee in the House of Representatives. to train and fly with the crew in the early part of the space shuttle. We went through 4 scrubs, any one of which, had we launched, would have been a very bad day. But on the 5th try, almost a month later, launched into an almost flawless mission for 6 days, only to return to Earth, and 10 days later, Challenger launched and blew up 10 miles high in the Florida sky. Spaceflight is hard. Spaceflight is risky business, particularly when you put the human in the loop. But human spaceflight, although it is true that that's what galvanizes the American people until Perseverance and Ingenuity came along roaming around on Mars. But there's so much else to NASA. On December the 18th, we are going to launch from French Guiana at the French spaceport on an Ariane 5, a very powerful rocket, a $10 billion telescope. That telescope will be positioned 1 million miles from Earth in a neutrally buoyant point, away from Earth on the opposite side of the sun, and it will peer out into not the expanse of space that our present space telescope that is orbiting the Earth looks at, that expanse of sky. And you've seen those incredible pictures of the heavens and the disclosure of new galaxies. This one instead is going to appear through a keyhole, and it's going to look back and capture the light from over 13 billion years ago. The light that was emitted about 250 million years after the Big Bang. We, for the first time, are going to see the formation of the first galaxy. We're going to see the formation of the first suns. And we're going to see in those first solar system planets. And we're going to look for an habitable atmosphere. And if we find it, we're going to see what it looked like so many years ago. And what about that can we learn as an origin of how we evolved over time in a planet that ended up being just the right distance from the sun, not too far, not too close, that had a lot of carbon, created an atmosphere that caused things to grow, and has created this planet. When you orbit the Earth every 90 minutes, about an hour of that in the daylight of the sun, about a half hour of that on the backside of the Earth, or the shadow of the Earth, which is nighttime. As you look out, you see just incredibly how beautiful this planet is. It's so colorful. It's such a magnificent creation suspended in the middle of nothing. And space is nothing. It's this airless vacuum that goes on for these billions of light years. And there is our home. It's so colorful, and yet it looks so fragile. You can actually see with the naked eye as we orbited. You can see how we were messing it up. And this is 36 years ago. I could see, because of the color contrast in the Amazon, how they were destroying the rainforest. I could look in the same window of the spacecraft to the east coast of Africa, to the mouth of the Amazon. I could see the sill hundreds of miles out into the Atlantic as a result of the destruction of the river. coming across Madagascar, the island nation off the southeast corner of Africa, where 36 years ago they had cut down all the trees. There were no roots to hold the topsoil. When the rains came, all of that soil washed down the rivers, and it was very obvious from space as we orbited the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour that there was all that silt coming out into the bright blue waters of the Indian Ocean. It is so incredibly beautiful, but it looks so fragile. As a politician, I became more of an environmentalist by virtue of what I saw. And what I resolved to do was that if I got back home, I wanted to be a better steward of our planet. These are some of the incredible opportunities that you have given. Let me tell you what the space program has done for Florida. We have a space program in Florida that has come to life. Old abandoned launch pads from years ago are roaring to life. In 2020, spaceport operations had a direct economic impact of $2.25 billion just in sales on Florida's economy. That didn't account for the additional indirect impacts, such as the supply chains and the spending activity of the workers. You put all that together, it's about $4 billion annually impact on Florida. The economic indicators translate into good paying jobs. And in Florida, these are tens of thousands of jobs. And not to mention the 24,000 jobs total statewide that are supported by the work just at the multi-user spaceport, the Kennedy Space Center. And by the way, the astronaut commander that was the head of the Kennedy Space Center for the last 12 years, I got him to come up as the number 3 at NASA headquarters to join the number 2, who I recommended to the White House, the second only female astronaut commander, Pam Melroy. Between Bob Cabana, formerly at Kennedy, and Pam Melroy, we are the leadership team, and we work as a team. And beyond just these economics and that tremendous impact on this state, we impact humanly on Earth. We've come through the Apollo generation, when such excitement over half a century ago, where we went to the moon after that famous declaration of a young president that said and took a risk, we're going to the moon and return safely before the end of the decade. America came together. We did it. We beat our nemesis, the Soviet Union. And lo and behold, what came out of that was in 1975, a Soviet spacecraft and an American spacecraft rendezvoused and docked in space. 1975. The crews lived together on orbit for 9 days, led by General Tom Stafford and General Alexei Leonov. A lasting friendship that, over the years, Alexei arranged for Tom to adopt 2 Russian boys. And guess who was invited to give the eulogy at Alexi's funeral, Tom Stafford. And so out of the space program, we've done amazing things to our foreign policy in the midst of a Cold War with nuclear-tipped missiles pointed at each other from the Soviet Union and the U.S. It was the civilian space program in space that we cooperated, so much so that the International Space Station, on orbit now, about 325 miles up, a space station that is 120 yards long from one goalpost to another, always has a crew of Russians and Americans and a lot of other international astronauts that are doing research and science and engineering. This is what our space program has brought us. And so, now, from that legacy of the Apollo generation, we are going into the Artemis generation. Artemis in Greek mythology was a sister to Apollo. And in the Artemis generation, as we go back to the moon to learn, to habit the moon, to conduct all kinds of new scientific industry, to do manufacturing, to learn how to live there in a hostile environment in preparation. Late in the decade of the 2030s, we're going with humans to Mars. Why Artemis, the sister of Apollo? Because we're going to land the first moon lander that will be a woman. And there will also be, in many landings on the moon, the first person of color that will represent the broad diversity of the diverse fabric of America. That rocket, the largest rocket ever, is being stacked in the vehicle assembly building right now. They did their umbilical test in that assembly building yesterday, so that it releases. The next time it releases, it will be at ignition, which will be in the first part of next year. 8.8 million pounds of thrust, the largest rocket ever, called the Space Launch System, with its spacecraft on the top, looking retro, like the old capsules. A spacecraft called Orion that will take a crew after this first unmanned mission, test out the rocket and the systems, and then a year and a half we will send the first crew around the moon in preparation for sending the next crew to lunar orbit, climbing into a lander that is part of our commercial lander program. They will go down, and that will start a series of landings on the moon, about one a year for over a decade. Can you imagine, Mr. Economics Club, the impact that that's going to have as we get into the Artemis generation? And so NASA in the 21st century is going to be the catalyst for the growth of a healthy and vibrant commercial space industry, expanding opportunities in low Earth orbit and pushing further to the moon and beyond. We're going to develop cutting-edge space technologies and transformative capabilities. Take, for example, we're going to learn how to take moon dust, regolith to the scientist, and how to mix it with a compound and make cement, and how to build habitats on the surface of the moon as we prepare to go to Mars. We're going to land in another year with a scientific probe and also a preliminary probe that's going to dig around in that regolith on the south pole of the moon. That's where the water is. It's ice. It's so cold on the South Pole because of little sunlight. And then we're going there and we're going to convert that water to rocket fuel, hydrogen and oxygen. And it's going to become the gas station, very likely, for the future spacecraft that will be in lunar orbit, developed, assembled, and gassed up from the hydrogen and oxygen on the moon to go all the way to Mars. And there's so much more in NASA. What about aviation? In a couple of weeks, I'm going to California to the Skunk Works, where we've got a needle-nosed aircraft. And the first A, by the way, in NASA is Aeronautics, a needle-nosed prototype of a supersonic jetliner that will take you wherever a jet will take you today in half the time and can fly over populated areas, because when it goes supersonic and goes the sound of the sonic boom, it will be a very hushed sonic boom, so we can fly supersonic transport across populated areas. Well, space has not only been a passion for me, but for so many of us. And especially, it's a passion for those kids that I'm going to talk to in just a few minutes down in the Challenger Center. Many of you certainly heard the life of Bill Gunner, a many-generation Floridian. My family, likewise, came to Florida back in 1829. I'm 5 generations. He's 6 generations. But we have a heritage that even though that great-great-grandfather came to what was then in Florida right after we were acquired as a territory, Port St. Joe, and on up to what is today Chipley. But another set of grandparents homesteaded under the Homestead Act, where if you worked the land for 4 years, the U.S. government would deed you 160 acres, and you had to demonstrate that you worked it continuously with no break. I have a copy of that deed in 1917 signed by Woodrow Wilson to my grandmother. That 160 acres today is at the north end of the Space Shuttle runway at the Kennedy Space Center. You can imagine the emotions that ran over me on that first time that we went to the launch pad, 3/4 of a century later, after they had scratched out a living out of that dirt, fought off rattlesnakes and mosquitoes and alligators, and just could not have believed that 3/4 of a century later, their grandson was going to literally leave the face of the earth. And now we're doing so much more. We've got scientific probes that are going back to Venus after 30 years. We're going to learn what happened to that atmosphere. indeed, not only is the sky the limit, the heavens, the cosmos is the limit. And we are passing this torch to a new generation, the Artemis generations. And one of the great things is that Florida, along with America, is going to continue to explore those heavens. Thank you for giving me the privilege of being a little part of this. Thank you for giving America a big part of the opportunity to lead the world in our space endeavors. It's time for us to make this dream continue to come alive. And let us unite this country in this mission and this dream. Thank you all.
So, does anybody have any questions? Dominic.
Well, thank you, Director. Senator, great friend to Americans and Floridians alike. Thank you for your incredible service. Grace, thank you for your decades of loving, selfless service to the state. And Bill, you're watching out there. We wish you had you here. We'll toast to you and see you soon. Real quick question for you, sir. There are some 3,000 dead satellites out in space. Talk a little bit about that and some of the space debris and how we get through that. I mean, we got enough pollution on Earth. We also have some orbiting around Earth. And how do our folks navigate through that? And what can we do to begin to clean that up?
Not only dead satellites, but there's so much space junk that if you go on the NASA website and just work through it, and you can see a pictorial graphic of the Earth in space and just see how much junk is around along with working spacecraft, satellites. And there have been people that have been irresponsible, in particular the Chinese. The Chinese tested an ASAT, which is an anti-satellite missile to knock a satellite out. They did this back in 2007, trying to catch up with our capabilities. And they blew it to smithereens, tens of thousands of pieces of their target satellite that they hit. But it just spread all in that region where so much of our activity is. Other satellites that are threatened by that space junk, our space station and our astronauts and cosmonauts on that space station. And so this is indeed a real problem. They continue. As recently as a few months ago, they put up their space station, but they didn't reserve enough fuel on their rocket to have a controlled reentry, because if you do it responsibly, you keep enough fuel, and then what would be space junk will come down in a controlled reentry and land in the ocean someplace of what's left of it after it burns up as it comes through the atmosphere and the molecules of air hit the spacecraft, burn up most of it. And this was a whole rocket coming uncontrolled. We didn't know where it was going to launch, where it was going to land, and we did not know because also they wouldn't tell us anything. They were very secretive. So yours truly, of course, has been pretty leaning forward on my comments about this. Spacefaring nations are going to have to control re-entry so we can stop that stuff. We are also, Dominic, trying to develop some kind of device that will go up and basically bring down a lot of that stuff, because if you can get it out of orbit, it's going to burn up as it comes back into the atmosphere. And by the way, we're encouraging a commercial venture. By the way, all this commercial activity started as a result of the NASA bill that Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, Republican of Texas, and I passed 11 years ago, that set NASA on a dual course. One was the NASA course, get out of low Earth orbit, go explore. And the other one was the commercial activities. And of course, if that's a commercial activity with astronauts, NASA is all over it with regard to safety. Thus, you see the very successful commercial activity today of NASA buys a ride on a commercial rocket to take cargo to the International Space Station, and now buying rides on SpaceX for our astronauts, and hopefully in a while buying rides on the Boeing Starliner spacecraft, also a commercial vehicle. So that's what's going on, Donna.
Hi, thank you for being here. So with the expansion of NASA and all these exciting projects, there's going to be a massive deficit or tech talent gap in terms of jobs and projections. So we have a huge opportunity here in Florida to do that. But my main question is, how is NASA partnering with higher education institutions in Florida and K through 12 in order to facilitate that growth?
I was actually trying to shorten my speech, mindful, and the part that I omitted purposely to shorten the speech was telling you about STEM. Education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's why I'm going to the Challenger Center this afternoon. We have a big effort. We use our astronauts not just to fly in space and to train, but we send them out to educational institutions. We give $1 million from NASA to the Challenger Centers of America. We have all kinds of STEM grants that we give to deserving higher educational facilities, including HBCUs. And so you would be just amazed how much NASA is involved in education. And by the way, there's nothing like an astronaut walking into a classroom for kids, because you want to get their attention and you want to encourage them on math and science. You got their attention. So NASA's in the middle of this. Yes, ma'am. And by the way, FSU and FAMU have received a number of those grants.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Not a question, but I have the microphone. I wanted to take the opportunity to recognize and to thank our former chairman. I don't know if everybody knows this, but Ashbel Williams' last day heading up the pension fund was yesterday. So I really wanted to take the opportunity. Earned countless billions and paid countless billions to Florida's 650,000 retirees. So I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Senator Gunter and Senator Nelson and Ashwell Williams for a lifetime of public service and contribution to the state of Florida and to us as individuals. Thank you.
And by the way, Ash is an example of the quality of people that run that Florida retirement system. And back when you all had me as state treasurer. Then the treasurer, the governor, and the comptroller were the three trustees. Now, at least we had enough sense to realize not to make any of the investment decisions. We did policy back then. And to give credit to Lawton Childs, and Jim Eaton is here, and Mary Childs are here. Lawton was the guy who went after the tobacco companies. And there was a major settlement of which they were looking for lots of dollars to come because of the states, and this was many states, having paid Medicaid expenses as a result of the deleterious effects of tobacco. But they weren't quite there yet in the settlement. And the state pension fund at the time had a lot of investments in tobacco stocks. And so Lawton's idea was, if you were going to be pure in your argument that we ought to get this money from tobacco to help our people, that then our own government shouldn't be investing in that very same industry. And there were 3 votes. Lawton was yes to divest. The comptroller, Bob Milligan, was a no, and I was the deciding vote. And of course, I wanted to vote yes. But there's a requirement that Ash can tell you that the trustees of the fund are personally liable for any financial decisions that they make as policy. And all I could see was my 2 little nickels being taken away if I made the wrong decision. And so I worked and worked and worked on that, so that I was pretty confident that making that policy decision, and so on a 2-to-1 vote, Florida divested of tobacco stocks. And ever since, the trust fund has continued to be one of the largest in the country. Back then, it was about the 3rd largest pension fund in the entire country, and one of the most successful. So kudos to Ash.
Last question.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Connor Donnelly, and I'm an MBA student here at Florida State. I also have the privilege to serve as the Class of 2022 MBA President. First off, I just wanted to say thank you to the Economic Club of Florida for having myself and my fellow MBA students, Devin, Esmeralda, and Heidi here to join you guys and learn, and also enjoy some fantastic food. We don't really get much of that, obviously. It's good to get a break from ramen noodles and to have some delicious food. So thank you guys for having us here. My question to you, Administrator Nelson. So as you mentioned, we had a young president named President Kennedy who gave a challenge to Americans to put a man on the moon. So what challenge would you make to younger generations now to continue to explore outer space?
We're going to Mars. By the way, my critics would like me to go on a one-way trip. We are going to Mars. We are going to push the limits of our ability in development of technology in order to do this. But when you do that, because space is hard, you develop all kind of new things. Let me give you I'll give you a couple examples. It's in everybody's pocket. That thing takes clear pictures like you wouldn't believe. That camera is on a chip that was developed by NASA for its satellites in its Earth-observing satellites. That's a direct part of the space program that is helping us every day. I'm going to give you another example. The Canada arm on the space shuttle, remember the arm that comes out and it catches satellites and it does all kinds of things? Now, the Canada arm on the space station, it moves on the space station back and forth. It does all of those things robotically. The technology for developing that is the technology that was used on me in my cancer prostate operation, so that they did not have to cut me open. They just stuck 5 holes in me, one of those being a camera, 2 of those being a little basket and clippers and tweezers, and all of that is robotic. I have gone in the operating room. The surgeon is sitting 10 feet away from the patient, looking into a microscope that he's seeing in 3D color, the inside where he is conducting the operation. All of that is directly out of the technology of the space program. So it's going to be this kind of technology, things we can't even think of, as we get ready to go and sustain human life all the way to Mars, and then, depending on how long we have to stay on the surface, of sustaining it on the surface, to protect humans from solar explosions, which are sending radiation through space, of which we're protected here because we have a magnetic field around the Earth that repels that radiation. And then that's the kind of stuff that is exciting in the future, that is going to be the transfer from our space program to the quality of life that we live on this Earth. Final comment. And that quality of life may not be for all of us on the surface of the Earth. It's possible we might have colonies on other celestial bodies. It is possible that we might have orbiting cities in orbit. This is not beyond the realm of possibility, but I know this: it's going to be an exciting ride. Thanks.
You've been listening to Bill Nelson, Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, speaking before the Economic Club of Florida on October 1st, 2021 in Tallahassee, Florida. For more information on NASA and space exploration, visit nasa.gov. The Economic Club of Florida promotes interest and enlightenment on important economic, political, and social issues of the day. To learn more, including how to become a member, visit our website at economic-club.com. This program was recorded at the Florida State University Alumni Center in Tallahassee, Florida.